So thank you for that introduction. Let's just get on with the business at hand. I will not talk much more about Paul. I invite you all to look up his bio at Waterloo University. It's a fascinating bio, and his publications are absolutely astounding. So you will learn a heck of a lot if you just log on and spend an hour perusing his accomplishments, and also understand the kind of courses that he teaches at Waterloo University. Very pertinent to the kind of things we are trying to foster at Hiroshima University. So Paul, over to you. I want you to open the door on the important subject of peace tech and the prospects for critically engaging technology to advance peace and sustainability. You know the time you have available. If you exceed that, I'll probably make some noise, but otherwise, go for it.
Very good. Well, thank you for the generous introduction and for the opportunity to contribute to this webinar series. I'm looking forward to getting to know more about NERPS and Hiroshima University, and hopefully a conversation like this can lay the groundwork for some opportunities for collaboration in the future. But before I jump right into it, let me give a brief overview to the path I'll be leading us on for the next 25 or so minutes. I'm going to start with some context, highlighting the proliferation of tech for good declarations and initiatives and organizations, many of which are, at least in part, a response to what I see as growing concern about the impact that technology is having on our world. A second important piece of context is to provide some orientation into peace tech, examining how the field of peace building has come to intersect with this broader tech for good agenda. And I should also signal here at the outset that tech for good, and in particular peace tech, is more than of academic interest to me. Again, if you take even a few minutes, not an hour, to check out our website, you'll get a sense as to why that's the case. But I'll also be making some reference to some of our programs and initiatives in the context of my presentation. And I'll be sharing a few slides along the way. Each of those slides are basically, there'll be a corresponding link that I'd be happy to share with anyone who's interested, so you don't have to worry about scrambling to capture some details, because again, this context setting, I'll be moving quickly through a number of names and initiatives. All of this context setting is intended to help set up a larger argument that I'll be sketching in the second half of the webinar. And in short, that is that I've come to be convinced that peace builders need to devote more attention to creatively engaging the private sector so that they can influence the culture and ultimately the norms of the organizations and individuals closest to the development of new technologies. So I realize it's a pretty thick agenda topic, and I will only be able to sketch this, but I hope it's stimulating. So let's start again with some context from tech lash to tech for good. It may seem obvious to most of us, but I think the portrayal of technology in popular media has in a relatively short period of time undergone a dramatic shift, both reflecting and shaping societal attitudes. What had been an undercurrent of optimism with flourishes of outright boosterism has been replaced with a suspicious tone that questions whether the goods offered by our new gadgets outweighs the bad. Perhaps the extent of this shift is debatable, and it no doubt varies around the world, but I think we are all talking about technology in ways we haven't before. And this has come quite quickly, actually. I think that's a good thing, just to be clear, that there's now more space to ask critical questions about technology. And what's particularly interesting to me is the extent to which critical questions are being raised within the tech sector itself. And I've had a front row view of this in my own community. So I'm just going to start sharing my screen for a few slides for the first portion of this. So is that visible? Well, probably nothing's visible. Is that visible? Good. I see some nods. So the University of Waterloo, in Waterloo, Ontario, Canada, is embedded in a region that has sometimes been billed as Silicon Valley North. The Toronto-Waterloo corridor is the heartbeat of technological innovation in Canada and stands among the top 20 communities for tech startups globally. One of the key organizations dedicated to supporting startups in our community, called appropriately Communitech, runs a myriad of programs to support more than 1,400 member companies. In 2018, Communitech rebranded and relaunched their annual Tech Summit as the True North Festival, a global gathering centered on tech for good. They seized this agenda as an opportunity to distinguish our innovation ecosystem as a place for people to, as Communitech CEO Ian Klugman likes to put it, move fast and fix things. And some of you might notice the reference there to a famous slogan by the founder of Facebook. A key point of focus in 2018 was the development and launch of the Canadian Tech for Good Declaration, an effort to build the commitment of companies to a set of 6 principles, including things like leave no one behind and think inclusively at every stage, principles that have also been elevated in recent years, certainly not Canadian distinctives, but have been elevated by the Canadian government and its policy in recent years. In 2019, the focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion in the tech sector was even stronger. And although the planned festival in 2020 couldn't be pulled off, Communitech was still able to award a $1 million prize to the most promising effort to use AI to tackle the problem of fake news and the spread of misinformation. Of course, the Canadian Tech for Good Declaration is just one of literally dozens of declarations and manifestos that have appeared in the last 2 years. Beyond words, there has been a proliferation of initiatives and organizations, many of which aim to contextualize what is meant by tech for good. One of the busiest clusters falls under the AI for good or data for good rubric. For example, you can check out the IEEE's Global Initiative on Ethics of Autonomous and Intelligent Systems, which produced a landmark document called Ethically Aligned Designs, a first step toward establishing standards for AI. Another less independent example is the Partnership on AI, an initiative by big tech companies that produced a publication called Norms for Responsible AI. And of course, each of these companies, from Apple to Google to Amazon to Microsoft, have a dizzying array of their own AI for social good projects that have been launched in recent years. Another cluster of organizations can be grouped under what is sometimes referred to as public interest technology or civic tech. Last month, the IEEE's International Symposium on Technology and Society focused on public interest technologies as their conference theme. Technologies that serve to address social needs and challenges in society. People working in this participatory innovation space ask communities what their needs are first, without presuming they know what is best for them. Last year, an initiative called Civic Tech Leaders in Global Communities crowdsourced a civic tech field guide that includes over 4,000 tech for good projects in 100 countries around the world. And beyond these 2 clusters, there's a long-standing and significant effort to apply technology to sustainability challenges. Numerous projects and organizations that make up the green tech or clean tech movement that can also be thought of as examples of tech for good. My own area of focus within the Tech for Good movement is in the realm of peace tech. While peace tech obviously encompasses the intersection of peace and technology, I recognize this may be a new term for many. I believe it was first coined, or at least brought to common usage, with the creation of the Peacetech Lab in 2008. Affiliated with the U.S. Institute for Peace in Washington, D.C., the lab was created to use the power of technology, data, and media to save lives and promote peace around the world. And it became an independent nonprofit in 2014. The lab's operating definition of peace tech is the application of technology to peace-related challenges. As evident in the kinds of projects the lab has sparked, this includes efforts to use technology to counter violence and transform conflict, but it also includes efforts to use technology to address systemic injustices and to restore relationships so that a sustainable and positive peace becomes possible. Now, I should say here that the expression digital peace building is sometimes used interchangeably or synonymously with Peacetech. But as noted at a consultation organized by the Toda Peace Institute and hosted by the Peacetech Lab earlier this year, digital peace building typically connotes a broader nexus that includes more than simply the use or application of digital technologies by peace builders. It also includes addressing emerging threats caused by digital technologies, such as cyber warfare tactics, such as disinformation aimed at undermining democracy, or hate speech on social media leading to greater polarization. A great reference point coming out of this consultation I just mentioned is a policy brief written by Lisa Shirk entitled 25 Spheres of Digital Peace Building and Peace Tech. Well, my own use of the term peace tech, similar to digital peace building, comes at the intersection of peace and technology from these two directions, encompassing efforts to leverage technology in order to augment the advancement of peace, as well as leveraging peace-building insights to critically engage technology. So both a positive and a critical angle to peace tech in my use of the term. Beyond the Peacetech Lab, another key node of activity can be found at the Peace Innovation Institute, based in The Hague, and affiliated with the Peace Innovation Lab at Stanford University. And beyond that Toda Peace Institute policy brief, New York University's Center on International Cooperation recently, as in like just a month ago, completed an ecosystem mapping project focused on the uses of data for peace building and prevention, kind of like a peace tech equivalent to the Civic Tech Field Guide that's intended to kickstart the development of an interactive map and an organizational network. Well, in the Canadian context, Peacetech has become an area of focus for a variety of participants within the Kindred Credit Union Center for Peace Advancement at the University of Waterloo, my home. Although Waterloo is also home to the oldest peace studies program in Canada, the center is a more recent addition, having been established in 2014. Our participants include research fellows, along with staff from affiliate organizations, the NGOs who are co-located in the Center for Peace Advancement that we refer to as our core collaborators. It includes, in that group, staff with organizations such as Project Plowshares, who play a leading role in disarmament efforts and international security, specifically in the areas of the arms trade, nuclear weapons, and outer space security. In recent years, Plowshares has been devoting more attention to emerging technologies of warfare and is active in, for example, the international campaign to ban killer robots. In 2019, interestingly, Plowshares was even invited to facilitate a keynote panel at Communitech's True North Festival focused on this theme of lethal autonomous weapons. Our participant community also includes students, and in recent years, we have facilitated a Peacetech living learning community, an interdisciplinary group of Waterloo students who meet weekly to explore deeper questions about technology and to identify ways they might apply their creativity to advancing peace. And our community includes artists. At the heart of the center is a gallery that hosts rotating exhibits, and even artists have gotten into the Peacetech theme. Our last exhibit prior to the pandemic was entitled The Cultural Life of Drones, a conceptual installation that provoked dialogue about the range of uses for drone technology and their impact on our everyday lives. So to be clear then, by these examples, Plowshares and the Peacetech Living Learning community and the artists we work with, Peacetech in the Center for Peace Advancement includes the critical engagement of technology, engagement that stimulates learning and action. But you can find researchers and practitioners and students and even artists at many university-affiliated peace centers. What really sets the Center for Peace Advancement apart is our Peace Incubator program. Indeed, a crucial ingredient in our mix of participants is a diverse and constantly changing collection of peace entrepreneurs. Since the center opened, we've supported 24 peace startups, new initiatives and organizations seeking to benefit from a collaborative community, mentorship, and access to seed funding. And given our location in Waterloo, it's not surprising that an increasing number of these ventures are seeking to use technology to scale their impact. And I'll briefly mention just a few of these so you can get a flavor or a sense of what the positive side of Peacetech looks like in our center. D-Mine Robotics is co-founded by a Waterloo engineering student and is developing robotic systems to accelerate the effort to rid the world of landmines and other unexploded ordnances. The remote excavator, as we speak, is now in advanced field trials in Cambodia. Lunaria Solutions, founded by a Waterloo Peace and Conflict Studies graduate, combines software and expert advice for complete diversity, equity, and inclusion solutions for companies, businesses, and other organizations. ESG Tree, founded by a PhD candidate in Waterloo's School of Environment, Enterprise, and Development, is an advanced environmental, social, and governance data management platform for private equity and impact investors. And Geomate, co-founded by two postdoctoral researchers at Waterloo, is a mapping service that uses AI to analyze the near real-time accessibility and safety of cities.
Paul, sorry to break in, but your voice is going in and out. So maybe if you can get closer to your speaker.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for letting me know. Well, I'm finished now sharing my screen. That was, I think, probably enough context, but gives a sense of the basis for what I'll be saying now in terms of a rationale for engaging the private sector. I've been immersed in Waterloo's innovation ecosystem, and I think there are some larger lessons to be drawn from that I'd like to dig into now. And please wave at me if you're having a hard time hearing again. So I think to dig into this larger argument I want to make about the importance of engaging in the private sector in order to properly engage with developments in technology, it requires that we challenge some commonly held assumptions about the role of business and industry in the development of technology. For example, I think it's commonly assumed that modern technology is subservient to modern science. That is, new technologies are the product of new advancements in science, and they depend on breakthroughs in theoretical knowledge. And an implication of this assumption is that governments and universities, those who fund and otherwise enable theoretical research, are the ones best positioned to understand and exert influence or control over the direction of cutting-edge technologies. Of course, no one would suggest the influence of the private sector isn't a factor, but as evident in the historical dependence of the aerospace and pharmaceutical and agricultural businesses on government funding for research and development, often the private sector is viewed as responsive and receptive of these advances of knowledge. And I think this narrative is out of date. And I'm convinced that the principal driver of technological innovation is now the private rather than the public sector. Apart from the growing economic power and influence of the private sector, an even more profound shift I want to underscore has to do with the way that advanced technologies are now developed and brought to market. The methodology pioneered in Silicon Valley has now become ubiquitous across the globe and can be summed up by a focus on startups. Rather than relying on large-scale, centralized, and carefully planned initiatives, new technologies are bubbling up from the grassroots, as it were, from a vast number of startup companies rapidly testing, deploying countless new ideas on a constant basis. The best ideas find traction with early adopters or attract investment so that startups can either scale or exit the market by being acquired by larger tech companies. And while large tech companies do have their own research and development capacity to a significant degree, they are outsourcing this work to a broader ecosystem of talent and resources that is far more dynamic and nimble than any large corporation could ever hope to be. Startups, I would argue, are now the primary context where invention and innovation happens. New ventures rather than lab projects are the container within which technology advances. As this startup methodology has matured and become increasingly formalized in recent decades, the organic image of an ecosystem of independent actors has sharpened, and now there are clearly defined roles for entrepreneurs, for incubators and accelerators, and investors, and there's an established economy of technical and business-related jobs. There are also a variety of standardized tools and techniques that guide these actors as they seek to make an idea real. One prominent example is the lean startup process, articulated by Eric Ries as a scientific approach to creating and managing startups in order to get a desired product to customers faster. This process builds in a bias for action, encouraging entrepreneurs to start testing their idea before they think they are ready by building a minimum viable prototype to share with prospective customers. It's proven to be an effective way of avoiding spending months or years perfecting a product before confirming that it meets a real need. In addition to a bias for action, the startup way has a preoccupation with speed. Eric Ries advises tech entrepreneurs to fail fast. And moving fast is more than simply a corporate mantra. It's become embedded in a way of working. For example, design sprints are a time-bound process pioneered by Google to take ideas from concept to reality in a matter of days or weeks. This way of working has proven to be incredibly responsive to customer needs, but I think it also squeezes out opportunities for reflection and discernment of issues that may be of concern to a broader range of stakeholders. Even more significant for the purposes of our discussion today, it also bypasses levers of control that governments have been able to exert on the development of technology in the past. Beyond the funding of R&D, this has included intellectual property systems and workplace or consumer-focused regulatory regimes. It's not that companies are more secretive about their technology. After all, open source approaches to software appear to have won the day, but that their primary commercial advantage comes from being first to market, which leaves potential competitors and society racing to catch up. Indeed, some would argue, and I would agree, that the most profound technology developed by the high-tech sector itself isn't the internet or social media or AI, but the very process now driving the development of cutting-edge technologies. So in my view, this rather ambitious overview is pointing to, excuse me, this ambitious overview is pointing to more than simply a way of working, more than a set of standardized techniques, and more than a favored organizational form. It's pointing to a culture, a set of norms and customs, intuitions and sensibilities that have come to define a particular social group. Now, if I had more time, I think it would also be helpful to discuss a second big shift beyond the way technology is now developed, but a shift in the nature of technology itself as we've moved from an analog to a digital world. But regardless, I think I've said enough already to make it appear that any efforts to constrain or redirect or apply emerging technologies are now facing a rather steep challenge. So what is our recourse? I think the clue to an alternative approach is found in the reference above to a high-tech innovation ecosystem bearing the hallmarks of a distinctive culture. I would argue that peace builders, as well as other civil society actors and governments, have a responsibility to take up the challenge of how to reshape this culture in ways that embed the propensity to prioritize peace and security, using lenses like human rights and sustainability and international cooperation rather than narrowly defined economic, military, or political agendas. The primary task before us is cultural formation, not policy formation. It's about norms and character more than rules and process. Given the mammoth scale of the world's largest technology companies and the global dominance of Silicon Valley as a startup ecosystem, it would be tempting to generalize this culture project. But I think the opposite impulse is called for. We need to particularize this effort, focusing on particular companies and particular geographic contexts. It's clear, for example, that Microsoft has a very different corporate culture than Facebook, and increasingly sees this as a positive differentiator in their search for customers and talent. There are also dozens of significant innovation ecosystems around the world, and literally hundreds of emerging ones some seeking to follow the playbook established by Silicon Valley, and others seeking to chart their own course. Indeed, innovation ecosystems, startups, and tech giants alike all devote an unusual degree of effort toward building culture. Apart from well-known employee perks and team-building escapades, even small companies, I've been surprised to find, have senior leaders who have culture in their titles. This too is a product of the nature and development of digital technology, because even more than pharmaceutical or aerospace or other industrial sectors, the key to innovation is found in people, not lab facilities, reservoirs of intellectual property, or other tangible assets. Tech companies openly acknowledge, all of them, that they are in a war for talent. Recruiting and retaining the very best people is, more than anything, what will determine their success. I would argue that an almost single-minded focus on human resources as their principal asset has given the employees of tech companies an unusual degree of institutional power. And of course, this is a debatable point, but we've seen all kinds of evidence in recent years at large and small companies of how this dynamic of activism, employee activism, is playing out. Very qualities that a company like Google prizes in its recruitment efforts, intelligence, creativity, teamwork, means that Googlers are not going to simply keep their heads down and follow orders, but they're going to be quick to organize and take action to effectively achieve any outcome they're aiming for. And as organizations everywhere are discovering, younger generations are increasingly seeking alignment between the mission of their current or prospective employer and their personal values. So the question this begs is whether there's a role to play for governments and civil society organizations, and whether we are prepared to step up and match the energy already evident in the private sector around tech for good. It strikes me that there has never been a stronger desire for ethical discernment, but there's also a lack of understanding and capacity to translate this desire into practice. And there's never been a window of opportunity like this to influence and shape the culture of the tech sector in a positive direction. Unfortunately, despite the fact that government funding is a crucial ingredient in Waterloo's innovation ecosystem, all levels of government that support that ecosystem have been measuring impact in reductively economic terms, rather than considering, for example, potential contributions towards sustainable development goal targets or other measures of community well-being. Certainly, public policies are already being driven by many other definitions of the good, including sustainability, equity, and inclusion. So without minimizing the importance of regulatory considerations for emerging technologies, I think governments can be much more proactive about incentivizing a tech for good culture. And likewise, I think there's a crucial role for civil society to be playing in this culture building work, particularly in adding a peace and justice lens to innovation ecosystems. Perhaps most crucially, there's a need to draw in voices from the grassroots and the margins into the conversation. It's not only those in positions of power who should be getting to define the good. Thus far, I would say that Waterloo's innovation ecosystem has made good progress in building bridges with the local community, playing an active role in supporting social service agencies, and beginning to grapple with issues like gentrification. The bigger challenge will be to expand that sense of community to include vulnerable peoples across the globe. After all, the power and influence of the tech sector lies in the fact that its products and services can so easily scale to markets far beyond Waterloo. Finally, universities and colleges are key actors in any significant innovation ecosystem and are also frequently instrumentalized, celebrated for the extent to which they can be responsive to the private sector's need for suitably trained talent and new ideas that can be easily commercialized. However, they also have a crucial role to play in cultural formation through curriculum design, opportunities for students beyond the classroom, and in the priorities and measures of success for academic research. More than ever, universities are expected to demonstrate value through community impact. And what could be more impactful, more profound, than helping to nurture a culture that prioritizes making a positive social and environmental change possible? Well, there's much more that could be said, but I trust that our discussion will provide the opportunity to explore the implications of this approach to critically engaging technology in order to advance peace and sustainability. So I thank you for your attention and look forward to the discussion.